Welcome to the monthly vinyl voyage. In September 2022, I started an experiment, building myself a new music collection from scratch at a rate of no more than one album a month. Coming up on 3 years later, it's formed a few dozen great albums, and I'm taking a bit of time to look at each of those purchases, to learn more about it, to reflect on what it means to me, and to digress onto any side notes that I find interesting. Thanks for joining me today. This was supposed to be my record of the month from May 2025, so quite recently. But this episode has been delayed quite a bit, and the reason for that delay is that I made a mistake. And I discovered that mistake early on in my research for this record, which resulted in me buying a second record. So this episode will be another two-fer. The first record I'm going to talk about will be Bon Jovi Greatest Hits, released on Universal Music in September 2024, but that will just be our starting point. Today I'm going to talk about what this album means to me, the history of the band, their other albums, and also some of their gigs. So what does this album mean to me? Bon Jovi are expected to release new material this year, 42 years after the band first formed. This is supposed to include both a brand new studio album and a reimagined version of their 2024 album, Forever. And that news reminded me that I ought to have some Jovi in my collection. So I actually asked my wife for this record as a birthday present. It's Bon Jovi Greatest Hits. It's on translucent vinyl with gold splatter. I think it was about £40, so not cheap. It's a compilation featuring a selection of hits from 1983 to 2010. The tracks include Living on a Prayer, You Could Love a Bad Name, Always, and Wanted Dead or Alive. And it's pretty good. But whilst researching for this episode, I realised that this album was lacking some material that I still really wanted in my collection. But before we get into that, let's talk Bon Jovi and do the artist rundown from 1970 to 1985. So let's talk about Jon Bon Jovi's origins, because understanding where he came from explains so much about what the band became. John grew up in a blue-collar, working-class family in New Jersey. His father was a trumpet player, his grandfather was a plumber. And this was the 1970s, where the American dream still felt achievable if you were willing to work for it. And his parents drilled that work ethic into him from day one. John wasn't a musical prodigy. He did a few trumpet lessons and some piano lessons at about 7, and neither of those stuck. A neighbour eventually taught him some guitar chords, but more importantly, his neighbour taught John that if you don't practice, you suck. And that very much became John's philosophy on music. Desire and work ethic, not natural talent, drove everything. 25 minutes south of Sayreville was Asbury Park, and in the late 70s and early 80s, that scene was thriving. You had Southside Johnny and the Asbury Dukes, you had Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, playing local clubs like the Stone Pony and the Fast Lane. These weren't the distant rock gods in Los Angeles or London. These were local guys writing songs about places that John actually knew. And that definitely helped set what felt possible to John. People like him were doing this. By 17, John was performing in his first real band, the Atlantic City Expressway. He was getting up about 7 a.m, making his way through a high school day, and then going and singing in bars until 2 a.m, getting home around 5 a.m, and losing money. A lot of people would not have stuck at it. But then comes this kind of pivotal moment in 1979. John's on stage singing his cover of Springsteen's Darkness on the Edge of Town, and he looks up to find Bruce Springsteen himself standing there with him, and the two sang together. John later said that this encounter made him even more single-mindedly focus, that what felt impossible was actually well within reach. That experience crystallised something for him, and by the beginning of 1980, during his senior year of high school, he quit his own cover band. He'd had this vision that the only road to the future was to become an original band whose music others would cover. He understood that longevity came through songwriting and commitment, even if that meant making no money initially. That's remarkable clarity for an 18-year-old. But he also had a plan. John graduated high school and in September 1980 began a new education. His second cousin, Tony Bon Jovi, ran the Power Station recording studios in New York, and John got a job there as a gopher, picking up food, running errands, doing dry cleaning and placing horse bets. John understood that this opportunity placed him at the epicenter of record making. And he wasn't just cleaning up, he was watching through the studio windows as the Rolling Stones, Queen and David Bowie worked. He asked questions, he observed how the engineers and the producers operated, and he took it all in. And at the same time, John was developing his own craft, writing his songs and sleeping on the studio floor. He recorded his original material late at night or on weekends, 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. when the studio time was free. During this period, he wrote a demo for Runaway, inspired by observations he made riding the New Jersey Transit bus into the city, watching the kids and the streetwalkers. John took that tape and shopped it around to managers, labels and production companies. Complete failure. 11 record companies rejected him before he had what he called a light bulb moment. Instead of targeting record companies, John went straight to the new rock station, WAPP, New York's newest FM rock. His reasoning was brilliant. The DJ was, quote, the loneliest man in the music business. He played Runaway for DJ Chip Hobart, who declared instantly, "That's a hit song." WAPP started playing it as a Hometown Heroes track. Then Doubleday, the book publisher that owned WAPP, started running Runaway on their 8 other radio stations. The song quickly became the most requested song, and suddenly the same record companies that had rejected the cassette were calling back asking for it. The success of Runaway led to John Bon Jovi signing with Polygram's Mercury Records. Someone at the record company suggested the name Bon Jovi because it followed the 2-word structure of Van Halen. That's how these decisions get made sometimes. The debut single and video for Runaway came out in 1983, and John quickly assembled the band. David Bryan quit college to join, Alec John Such came from a well-paid cover band, and Tico Torres, who was 10 years older, married, and had already had a record deal with Frankie and the Knockouts, came. Then there was Richie Sambora, who joined in the most rock and roll way possible. He walked up to John at a show and announced, "I want to be your lead guitar player." But Richie could back it up. He could play, sing and write, and his harmony vocals with John create magic. After a disastrous 18-minute opening set for ZZ Top at Madison Square Garden in 1983, the band hired manager Doc McGee. McGee convinced John that he'd make them the biggest band in the world. His philosophy was simple: constantly tour and take the bands to the people. After recording their debut album, they immediately went out on tour in 1984. The first tour was grueling, 25 clubs in 30 days. But they found immediate international success in Japan, where they were treated like the Beatles. Reflecting on the speed of their early career, John Bon Jovi said, "You have your whole life to write your first record. You have 6 or 7 weeks to write the second." The second album, 7800 Degrees, released in 1985, was rushed, and by John's own admission, it's not great. The first single barely broke the top 40. The album sold 800,000 copies, which wasn't awful, but 1985 was a blockbuster year for music. Brothers in Arms sold 9 million copies that year. Like a Virgin sold about 5 million in the US alone, and No Jacket Required sold 4 million. And the hit singles from those albums dominated radio play. Then there was the hostile touring environment. In the US, Bon Jovi was still opening for more major arena acts like the Scorpions, who toured with what John called the black t-shirt crowd. These audiences considered Bon Jovi a pop band, and as John put it, they f***ing hated us. They threw things. Tico Torres had to wear a plastic baseball helmet because the quarters and nickels were pinging off his head. The experience pushed them to become a heavier rock band, although, as John said, it also gave them thick skin. Despite the mediocre reception of their first 2 records, they toured relentlessly, around 500 shows around the world. They were establishing themselves as a live band, and crucially, getting better. John was very serious about his craft, developing his vocal work, performing warm-ups and cool-down exercises after shows, and staying clean and sober to protect his voice. Now for me, Bon Jovi had a golden decade between 1985 and 1995, so I'm not even going to consider any material from outside that period. We're skipping the first 2 albums and coming in with Slippery When Wet, which is a fabulous album. I mean, if we look at the hit rate on this, Let It Rock, it's a slightly questionable opener at 524, it's a little bit indulgent, but after that, this album is hit after hit. The whole thing is a quality album, which I'm showing with these little red Bon Jovi smiles. Okay, so that's a solid album. Followed up by New Jersey, released in 1988. New Jersey was a good album. A lot of people like it. It was less for me. I would say the quality tracks on here are Lay Your Hands on Me, Bad Medicine, Born to Be My Baby, Blood on Blood, and I'll Be There for You. Other songs, I can take or leave them. So for me, it's not Slippery When Wet, but it's not a bad album. In 1992, we had the release of Keep the Faith. Again, perhaps less my cup of tea, but Keep the Faith is a good track. In These Arms is good. Bed of Roses is excellent, really well worth the 6.5 minutes. And even I Want You is a good track. Then we come to Crossroad, the best of, released in 1994. And this is a superb best of. Look at the hit rate on this. Living on a Prayer, Keep the Faith, Someday I'll Be Saturday Night, which is a great song, I think, underrated. Always, Wanted Dead or Alive, Lay Your Hands, Give Love a Bad Name, Bed of Roses, Blaze of Glory, In These Arms, Bad Medicine, I'll Be There for You, In and Out of Love. Slight weak point, but not a bad track. And the classic Runaway gets tucked on here, which is nice. And then Never Say Goodbye. This is a great thing. The only problem with this, as a really solid best of, is that less than a year later they released These Days. And These Days as an album is right back in my jam. I think there are some awesome songs on here. For us to pick a couple out, Something for the Pain is a brilliant song. These Days is brilliant. My Guitar's Lies Bleeding in My Arms, yeah, it's alright, a little self-indulgent, but it's a good song. Hearts Breaking Even, superb song. And then Diamond Ring, which isn't really my cup of tea, but even that is a great song. I was travelling in Germany when the single Give Me Something for the Pain came out, and it was almost constantly on MTV there, which was a real treat for me because MTV was expensive and rare in the UK, so I rarely got to watch it. So the trouble with Crossroad is that whilst it covers the early albums really well, none of the good stuff from These Days is on there. Here at 1995, I stopped covering albums, because Bon Jovi continued to evolve their sound and stay relevant on Crush, Bounce and Have a Nice Day, and just none of them are for me. There must be a newer greatest hits album than Crossroad. And yes, there is. And look at that. Look at the hit rate on that is very high. 11 on the first disc, 8 on the second. That is going to be a great album. So what I have is this. A special reissue of Bon Jovi Greatest Hits. Released in Europe in September 2024. It's pressed on this translucent vinyl with gold splatter. The gatefold sleeve is high quality, if a bit bare. But unfortunately, that's not the full story. Because the track listing we saw before is for the CD album, disc 1 and 2. If you get the vinyl, and I've rearranged the back cover here so it fits legibly on a landscape screen, this is what you get. And suddenly, well, that's a bit disappointing. I've got 2 records and only 10 really good hits on those 2 discs. And there's basically nothing here from these days on these 2 discs. It's like they just forgot to press the 3rd and 4th records here. So, realising my mistake, I think, oh well, maybe there's a 4-disc vinyl edition. And that's the rub, you see, because there is. But the 4-disc vinyl edition does exist, but it's really rare. I've not found any for sale, which is a bit of a shame, because this would be a great piece of vinyl to own. I'm probably going to keep looking for it, if I'm honest. But what I have is the 2-disc greatest hits, and it has 10 good tracks on it, but that just doesn't seem like enough Jovi to have in my life. And you know, hands up, this is entirely my fault because I researched this album. Obviously not enough. I even sent a link to my wife so she could buy it for me as a birthday present. And I do love the transparent splatter. I think it looks really fun, even if watching it spin makes me feel a bit queasy. But it's not enough Jovi. Well, maybe I should get a copy of Crossroad. I mean, that's got a big hit rate. But actually, I've already got many of the songs on their greatest hits, so getting Crossroad doesn't really add much. It doesn't cover any of These Days, which is a lot of the tracks that I'm missing. So maybe I should get These Days. Well, I've really liked some of the tracks on These Days, but with vinyl you can't skip the ones you don't like so much, and the hit rate on These Days is actually a bit low. So in the end, what I did, I thought, what is the one album that I should have? And that album is obviously Slippery When Wet. Every track on it is my taste. So that's what I did. I went out and bought a second-hand copy of Slippery When Wet. It's an original pressing, but they pressed so many of these that original pressings are not even that hard to find. And yes, it's probably what I should have gone with in the first place. But let's talk more about Slippery When Wet. Going back to 1985, as they approached their 3rd album, the band understood that their career would stall if they failed to deliver. John recognised they needed a jump start, so he brought in an outside co-writer, Desmond Child. The songwriting sessions became intensive. John would drive to Richie Sambora's mother's basement, often bringing pizza, and they'd write until the parents came back from work. And it was here they wrote Wanted, Dead or Alive, inspired by the lonely, constantly moving existence of their tour bus. They were equating the modern-day rock star to a cowboy riding into the next town. John arrived at his first session with Desmond Child with a title on a piece of paper, You Give Love a Bad Name, and the resulting song was instantly recognised as a hit. Their most famous collaboration was Living on a Prayer, which was groundbreaking because it utilised characters, Tommy and Gina. This turned the song into what John called a cinematic sonic recording, focused on working class struggles. John intended it to reflect the stories of people he knew who got married or joined the military after high school. John initially disliked the song because the verse only had one chord. He wanted to save it for a movie soundtrack, but Richie and Desmond begged him to at least cut it, convinced that it was their best song to date. To record the full album, John insisted on working with producer Bruce Fairbairn after hearing his work on a Black and Blue cassette, and he pushed to record in Vancouver, Canada. The choice was strategic, getting away from New Jersey distractions to just be a rock band and concentrate. The recording sessions were remarkably fast, with rhythm tracks completed in just 3 or 4 days. The working title was Wanted, Dead or Alive, but the final title, Slippery When Wet, was inspired by a sign at a strip bar in Vancouver. The original album cover featured what John described as a bodacious woman, very 80s, but it was rejected by PMRC due to the sexually suggestive nature. They'd already printed 500,000 copies at that point. Manager Doc McGee promised a replacement. There's a lot written about the replacement album cover being a 3M solution, spraying some water on a garbage bag. It is what it is. The success of the album, though, was instantaneous and massive. Fueled by MTV, You Give Love a Bad Name became their first #1 hit, and I think the video for it was absolutely brilliant. Music videos were still a relatively young art form in 1986. MTV had only launched 5 years earlier, so there wasn't really a precedent for this type of approach. The band's previous videos had been quite bizarre and pretty badly received. John himself later called Runaway video absolutely awful. It featured awkward performance footage interspersed with shots of a young girl shooting fire from her eyes. And the band had no creative input. By their third album, they'd learned their lesson. They were a live band who'd focused relentlessly on touring, delivering hundreds of shows around the world the previous years. They knew their strength was their arena experience, the energy, the crowd interaction, the sheer scale of it. So instead of making a traditional music video with some narrative or concept, they filmed what John himself called an infomercial for their arena show. They shot a staged performance at the Olympic Auditorium in LA that showed you exactly what you would get if you bought a ticket. The lights, the staging, the crowd going wild, and John working every corner of the stage. If you take the audio away and just watch the video, it looks like a well-produced advert for their tour, and that was precisely what it was. It was marketing genius. For the fans who'd never seen them live, it was a promise of what was coming. And for fans who had seen them live, it was validation that the band was ready for arenas. They weren't trying to be something they weren't. They were advertising their actual strength. And in an era where MTV could make or break a band, Bon Jovi used it to sell not just a song, but an experience. So You Give Love a Bad Name became their first #1 hit, and in the US, the band finally graduated from opening for other bands to headlining full arenas. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the New Jersey problem, because it's one of the most fascinating aspects of Bon Jovi's success, and it speaks to something larger about how regional identity can be both a curse and a blessing. For audiences outside of the US in the 80s, New Jersey carried no baggage whatsoever. If you were a UK listener hearing Living on a Prayer, you had no idea that the band's home state was considered a liability. You just heard another American rock band. The lack of regional context proved a massive advantage. But within the United States during the late 70s and early 80s, New Jersey had a serious perception problem. The state was seen as an unglamorous industrial wasteland, home to more Superfund pollution sites than any other state. It was also a kind of geographic limbo, the smelly stretch that you drove through between New York and Philadelphia. This prejudice ran deep. Record companies would routinely tell artists that admitting they were from New Jersey was career suicide, and advised them to claim that they were New York instead. The state meant working class stereotypes, Jersey accents, chemical plant workers, unglamorous suburbia, and Newark in particular symbolised the urban decay after the 1967 riots. But the narrative began to shift with Bruce Springsteen. He chose to embrace rather than hide from his roots, transforming factory towns into symbols of authentic America. He infused boardwalks and blue-collar life with a romance and dignity, and in Springsteen's hands the highway represented escape, not entrapment. By 1984, even Ronald Reagan was co-opting this emerging authenticity, embracing Born in the USA. Suddenly being blue-collar became patriotic rather than embarrassing. This created cultural space for other New Jersey artists to emerge. Bon Jovi seized that opening and doubled down on their Jersey identity. That defiance culminated with their 1988 album literally titled New Jersey. Their marketing leaned into the regional pride. New Jersey versus Everybody t-shirts and lyrics like New Jersey to Tokyo in Raise Your Hands. The international market proved decisive. Foreign listeners lacked the domestic prejudice, and Bon Jovi achieved their first major breakthrough in Japan in '84, Their first headline tour in '85 took them to Tokyo and London, well before they played any US arenas. So that lyric, New Jersey to Tokyo, wasn't just a phrase, it mapped their actual career trajectory. The Japanese market validated them while America remained sceptical. What's remarkable is how this played out. The very thing that domestic record executives cringed at, their working class authenticity, became their primary selling point once they had succeeded internationally. The prejudice at home forced them to prove themselves globally first. By the time they conquered America, they were already world superstars. This is an original UK pressing from 1986. It has the sunrise coloured label and a basic slip sleeve. There's a lyric insert which includes some of the car wash art that was planned for the original album cover. I just love that there's a postal address for the official fan club. So let's talk about just how massive Slippery When Wet became, because the numbers are staggering. The album was released in August 1986, and it spent 8 weeks at #1 across the Billboard 200. By the end of 1987, it was Billboard's top-selling album of the year, not just in rock, but across all genres. The RIAA initially certified it 7 times platinum in 1987, but that number kept climbing. Eventually it reached 15 times platinum in the US alone, making it one of the top 100 best-selling albums in American history. It was a breakthrough moment for glam metal, helping to bring the genre into mainstream pop culture and proving that heavy rock could be radio friendly without losing its edge. Although that statement itself is highly controversial, and I'm saying it from the view of record sales numbers. After 5 years of relentless touring and 2 albums that didn't quite connect, Slippery When Wet validated everything that the band had been working toward. One of my great childhood memories is Bon Jovi. In 1996, my dad took my sister and I to see Bon Jovi at the Milton Keynes Bowl. I remember that we went by coach, which was very unusual to see my dad on a coach, but I guess it was probably a trip that was organised by someone that we knew. I mean, it was an amazing gig. I was young, I was very tired by the end. I can remember having stood up pretty much the whole time because there weren't seats. And I remember not really knowing what to do with myself at a big stadium gig. I also remember being worried about losing my dad in the crowd because we didn't have seats, just a patch of grass. So it was entirely possible in the days before mobile phones that if I wandered off to the bathroom, I wouldn't be able to find my way back to them. But yeah, amazing experience. It was their These Days tour, and looking up their set list, they played Lay Your Hands on Me, Bad Medicine, You Give Love a Bad Name, Runaway, Diamond Ring, Bed of Roses. They did a cover of John Fogerty's Rockin' All Over the World, Blood on Blood, and then they did acoustic versions of Wanted Dead or Alive, I'll Be There For You, and In These Arms. They did Something for the Pain, Someday I'll Be Saturday Night. They did I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, with kind of interludes from Papa Was a Rolling Stone and Jumpin' Jack Flash, and then Keep the Faith. And then Encore 1 was Letting You Go and Hey God. Encore 2 included Always, My Guitar Lies Bleeding My Arms, and These Days. And then a final third encore was Wild in the Streets, followed by Living on a Prayer. And it was everything you'd expect from a band who prided themselves on their arena stadium performances. What's missing? I feel like I've already covered the songs I like from New Jersey, Keep the Faith, and These Days. And there isn't really much fat you could trim off this record. Maybe I'd swap Let It Rock for something, but honestly, this is such a solid album. You can't really do much better. I know this choice and episode is going to make some people angry. So I want to address some of the criticisms that Slippery When Wet receives, because I think it reveals more about the critics than it does about the album. Let's start with the complaint that it was too pop for metal and too metal for pop. You know what? Get over yourselves. That's binary thinking. That the album blends glam metal aesthetics with pop hooks. And apparently, the Grammy establishment and critics struggled to categorise it. That's not a weakness, that's innovation. The fact that it defied easy categorisation is precisely why it reached so many people. Then there's the accusation of over-commercialisation, and that the band was chasing radio success rather than artistic depth, particularly working with Desmond Child. And yes, they absolutely needed Slippery to be a million-selling hit. But crafting songs that millions of people want to hear is an art. Writing a hook that sticks in someone's head for decades isn't selling out. It's incredibly difficult to do well. The idea that commercial success and artistic merit are mutually exclusive is snobbery, plain and simple. Critics complain that songs like Living on a Prayer and You Give Love a Bad Name are emotionally shallow and overly bombastic. But were they? Living on a Prayer told the story of Tommy and Gina, working class couple struggling to make ends meet. It resonated with millions of people who saw their own lives reflected in those lyrics. Just because it was delivered in a big anthemic way doesn't make the emotional content less valid. Not everything needs to be delivered in a whisper to be meaningful to people. And then there's the criticism that really gets me. The idea that testing songs with teenagers and tailoring the album to their tastes was pandering and showed fan service over artistic integrity. Think about what that's really saying. It's saying that music written for teenagers, and let's be honest, for young women specifically, is somehow less legitimate than music written for male rock critics. It's saying that wanting your audience to actually enjoy your work is a moral failing. And let me be clear, music written for children, for women, for non-hard rock fans is not intrinsically bad. The assumption that it is reveals deep-seated prejudice about whose taste matters. When Bon Jovi played their demos at a pizza parlour to gauge fan reaction, they weren't betraying some artistic code. They were doing what smart artists do, listening to their audience. There were a lot of complaints, aren't there? The complaint about their glam look and their MTV-friendly persona, questioning their authenticity as rock musicians. It's gatekeeping, pure and simple. Since where does wearing makeup or caring about your visual presentation disqualify you as a musician? Bowie wore makeup, Prince wore makeup, the Beatles wore matching suits. Image and music aren't in opposition. They're complementary art forms. Finally, there's the critique that heavy keyboard production and long, fluffy keyboard intros alienate fans of the kind of rawer rock sounds. While those fans of rawer rock sounds have plenty of other albums to listen to, music written with a different audience in mind can still be good music. The fact that it wasn't to your taste does not make it objectively bad. Here's the bottom line. Slippery When Wet sold 15 million copies in the US because it connected with people. It provided anthems for working class struggles. It gave teenagers music that made them feel powerful, and it created sing-along moments that brought people together. That is not a lesser achievement, it is a profound one. Accept that music written not with you in mind can still be good music. Accept that commercial success isn't artistic failure. And accept that the tastes of teenage girls and working class kids matter just as much as the tastes of rock critics and the self-appointed guardians of authenticity. Sometimes the most authentic thing you can do is just to write music that makes people happy. End of rant. Now, I'm sure I've made mistakes in my research and my presentation. We're only human. But thank you for listening.